Okay folks, today we're going to talk about how to set up your 3D model inside of 3D Studio Max. It could technically be any 3D software package that you have, but for me Max is just a little bit simpler, and it seems to also work well with Previs in terms of ease of use and the tools that you need to get up and running. Maya can be a little bit daunting. Blender is free, but it also has a lot of quirks because of it being free. Softimage is pretty much just a bunch of handles with numbers on it, so I really don't care too much for that. And the reason why we really can't go straight from Revit into Unity is because of the way the shaders are set up inside of Revit. Revit uses an open software or open piece of software that allows for a lot of people to use these types of shaders, but unfortunately Unity, our end product, does not really like those type of shaders. So we're going to use 3D Studio Max as a converter. If you don't mind going through and updating and naming and re-adding your textures to every model that you have, then you can go ahead and dump it into Unity as you see fit. But just going through this extra step inside of something like 3D Studio Max or even Maya, it might be harder for the Mac people because there is no 3D Studio Max for Maya, and it can be a little daunting to use Maya because it's really made back, I think, in 2000 or I'm sorry, early 1996. It was made for cars, so it's kind of difficult to use. So 3D Studio Max, use it if you can, just because I don't have to teach you a lot and it's just easy to get up and running. So first thing I'm going to do is just open up 3D Studio Max, and then with Max open we're going to import our file. Now the interior design program was able to give me a file to use for your training, and so in this case here I'm going to go to the Max symbol, then import. And since most of you are going to be coming from Revit, I prefer that you didn't, but you know what, that's just how it works. We click on link Revit, and then we're going to go to the file or the model that you want to use. In this case here it's going to be the Savoy, and what we're going to do is I'm going to import that and hit open, and you're going to let it do its thing. Something to keep in mind is the larger the file, the longer it takes to process. So keep that in mind as you're maybe touching up on a deadline or anything else. You might want to work at a smaller scale. Now that that's been handled, we have some options here that we need to deal with. The biggest one is just this preset. Actually, it's the only one. If you click on that and do Autodesk Revit, do not combine entities, and then hit attach file. Again, you're going to let it do its magic. It's going to ask you if you want to create a daylight system. If you're going to do some rendering inside of 3D Studio Max and you want to use like global illumination or V-Ray or something that's going to give you a lot more control over your lighting, I do suggest that you click on yes. But for this instance here, since we don't need that, we're going straight to Unity for that. We're going to hit no. Now that the model has been placed, the last thing that we need to do for this dialog box is we want to unbind it. Right now, because of this being attached and linked to it, if you make any changes inside of Revit, it will automatically update inside of 3D Studio Max, just because of this linked file being here. Now, that's an upside, but the downside is that if we make any changes that we need for Unity, it's not going to happen. And so what we really need to do is we need to bind this. Technically, we're unbinding it, so I'm kind of confused on that wording, but just go with it. So I'm going to click on bind. And then it's going to say, hey, we're going to do this. Are you sure? I'm going to say, yes, proceed. So once that's done, you can see the link is missing. And we have a file here. There's a sun system that's coming from Revit. We don't need that, so I'm going to delete that. And what we actually have here now is a full 3D model from Revit. Alt-W makes the window big. And clicking, or Alt and middle mouse down will allow me to orbit around an object. Now I'm going to leave it up to you to learn how to maneuver through Max. That's just something that this tutorial is not made to cover. But as you can see here, since we removed that light, everything's really dark, and we don't want that. So I'm going to come over here to realistic, right click, and change this to consistent colors. So let's brighten everything up. And it seems like we have some areas here that seem like they have some textures, but we don't want to, but we're not really sure where they're at and what textures they're using. And if you were to just import this straight into Unity, if you go straight from Revit into Unity, what's going to happen is you're just going to look like this, and we have no way of knowing which object, material, or texture belongs with the other object. You'd have to go through it and do it piece by piece, hand by hand. But the reason being is because Revit and Max are made by Autodesk, so that means they share a lot of similarities. So the first thing I'm going to do is come over here and right-click under Consistent Colors, and then go to Materials and do Shaded Materials with Maps. And so what that does, it changes it over to these materials. It's kind of hard to see until we zoom in, but you can see that we have now a gravel material and we have a wood material on the door. Now there's a lot of eccentricities that we can worry about in terms of this building if we were to export it all, but I don't really have the time to talk about those per se. We'll leave that to a different tutorial, something more in depth, but this is meant to be a small primer to help you get into this as fast as possible. So what I'm going to do is I had previously found some furniture in here, so I'm just going to hide that wall by right clicking or selecting it by left clicking, and you can tell by when this little cursor comes up here, or your gizmo, I think is what it's called. Right click, hide selection. So that's disappeared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on this sofa. I'm going to call it sofa, just for short. You probably want to name it some other way. You probably already have, but in my case, I just want to call it sofa. What we want to do is we want to isolate it. So if we come down here at the bottom where this little red little button is, we can isolate that. So now I have an isolated couch. Nothing's disappeared, nothing's hidden, but if I just toggle this off and on, I now have a different view, or I have all the elements hidden and they won't distract me when I'm working with this. So the thing that's going to make life a bit easier on us is switching out the shaders. The shaders is what's causing the problems. And again, it all comes from Revit. Revit uses these open-ended types of coding for their shaders, and Unity doesn't like those. So Max and Maya and all those other programs are going to allow us to make those to make this conversion way easier and with less hair pulling. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to open up our material editor. There's two ways of doing that. You can either hit M on the keyboard, or you can come and click this little globe icon, this checker globe with this little dialog box there. So if you come and click on that, your material editor shows up. Now there's no materials on here, and it's just made to keep it a little bit simpler. But what we need to do is we need to see what this sofa is made out of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick or click on this eyedropper and say pick material from object, and then I'm going to click on the sofa itself. So now you can see here I have 3 materials on one object, which is why it's called multi-sub-object. One object, 3 materials. And the thing that's causing the problem with the shaders are these Autodesk materials. They don't work very well, they don't play nicely, they're open-ended, and they're only meant to be shared between Autodesk products. So Unity does not like them. So again, I can't repeat that enough. Unity does not like these Autodesk materials. So if I click onto this one, it takes me inside of that, of steel chrome plated. And if we were to click on this here, we're going to switch to a standard material. So under materials, standard, standard. I'm going to click OK. So now that swapped me over. Nothing much has happened, mostly because it was gray already. I might go ahead and pump up the specular level and pump up the glossiness a little bit. Make it look a little bit more metal. That's not really how you do that, but this is the simplest way for what we're doing right now. So I'm going to click on this little orb with the up arrow and it's go to parent. So that's going to take me back to the sub object material. And then I'm going to click on this nice wood here. So now I'm inside of this shader. Again, an Autodesk shader that Unity does not like. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. And then I'm going to find the image. And then I'm going to copy it. And then I'm going to, again, just like I did before, change it to standard. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to paste this in. And then I'm going to double check and make sure that I didn't have the right map. See, again, I kind of did it wrong because now we're using an Autodesk bitmap, and it doesn't like those either. So I'm going to copy the source and give it another shot. And so instead of choosing an Autodesk bitmap, we're just going to choose a normal bitmap. And it looks like it didn't like where it was located, and that is a long word. And where did that come from? Holy Jesus. But as you can see here, it went ahead and opened it up, and I have the file that it went ahead and made a file for me for all the textures. So I'm going to hop inside of here and find that cherry wood. And this is another reason why I don't care too much for Revit. When you export things out, it's actually going to start duplicating certain things. So as soon as I find that wood, if you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so it looks like we have 6 objects in here that have the same material, instead of just having the one texture being used, it copied everything for some weird reason. But to be safe, I'm going to choose the one that we were using, which was Cherry 4, and hit open. And so now we are now in a format that Unity and both Autodesk are going to like. As you notice though, it hasn't shown up. It still shows up very gray. So if we click on this little icon here, it's going to show all the textures up. And it's just this checkerboard with this light. I don't know what that means. It's fancy, I guess. But again, that allows us to use the same materials. And normally I would sit there and say, yes, we're done. So for right now, I'm just going to do an file, export, selected. Because if we did an export, it's going to take everything with it. That includes everything in the house. If you want that, fine. But in this case, we only want the couch that's been selected. And you can tell that by the gizmo down here at the bottom and the white selection arrows. So if we do export selected, and for the fun of it, we'll just go to the desktop where I'm keeping everything for right now, and give it a name. Make sure you choose Autodesk FBX. And then we hit save. So what's going to happen now is we're going to get a conversion info thing. So with this conversion info, we want to double check a couple of things. So we're going to do an include, and we pretty much want this set up here, smoothing groups, blah blah blah. Check pretty much all that off. Actually, let's have smoothing groups turned on. I don't have time to explain what that is, but it's one of those things that can make a difference between something that looks really bad and something that looks really good. So I'm going to click that off. Make sure animation is turned off because we don't have any animation. We don't need it. Unity has its own cameras, so we don't want any of the cameras to carry over. And Unity has its own lights. And because the lights from 3dsMax don't carry over anyways, we don't need that extra burden to take lights with us. What we do want to do, however, is we want to make sure the textures come over with us. So we want to embed media. Make sure that's checkboxed. Under advanced options, make sure that you go to axis conversion. Make sure that Y is up. That's just the thing. I don't know where they came up with that because some programs Z is up and other programs Y is up. But in this case here, between the conversion between Max and Unity, just make sure Y is up. Next thing you want to do is hit OK. Alright, so now that we've hit OK, it looks like everything's kind of converted. You just want to check your desktop, make sure everything went. Sure did. I have my sofa file here. And what I'm going to do real fast, not so much that you guys can tell, I just want to open up a Unity file and dump in my FBX and see what that looks like here. And it looks like everything carried over. Alright, good. Alright, we'll see you at the next tutorial.